Welcome to Universal Man. My name is Mark Webbett, and today I'm starting a new series called the Apex Protocols. And in this series, what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you my most potent systems and methodologies for unleashing your apex potential. And today we're going to be kicking things off with the cut method, arguably the most important tool, technique, whatever you want to call it, that I've developed in my 8 years of being a self-development content creator. CUT in CUT method stands for Centered Urge Transmutation, and it is essentially a willpower technique designed to help you overcome even the most powerful cravings. So instead of having to rely on white knuckle intensity or motivational highs, you can instead join the thousands of other clients and customers of mine who have used the CUT method to transform their lives and tap into reliable willpower that allows them to shift how they show up and overcome emotional resistance without repressing, without forcing, and without fighting themselves. I know these are big claims, but I just encourage you to try this out yourself. And this is really just going to be an introductory video to the technique, really condensed to the point. And if you want a deeper dive into this, where I really flesh it out and explain all the connections and that sort of thing, well, then make sure you check out the link below and check out the elite tier of my Vanguard community, because that's where I go in more detail on all of this. But, just check this video out, see if it clicks with you. And if it does, well, then maybe you want to get the full picture. Okay, to start things off here, we got to talk about two neurochemicals, dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine gets a lot of attention today. It's that feeling of anticipation, that feeling of stimulation, excitement that you get when you're doing something new that you like, or you're browsing your favorite website, excited to see what's on there, or playing that new video game. Or it's also that feeling that you get when you want to act out on a craving, right? It's that feeling of like wanting that cookie, wanting that porn, wanting that drug, whatever it is that you're hooked on, your brain, it sends that feeling of wanting it through primarily dopamine. And, as I talk about the neurochemical stuff here, I'm really simplifying it a lot. And, in some ways we don't even fully understand how it works, but the explanation will work for what we're doing here. Okay, so that's dopamine, right? And it's basically your brain's way of saying, hey, there's something important and good going on over here. Now, the second one we got to get into here is serotonin. Serotonin is kind of like a status neurochemical. Basically, the higher you view your sense of self, you view your place in the world, the more serotonin your brain releases, and it creates this overall feeling of well-being. So if you feel secure in how much money you have, you feel secure in your career, you feel secure socially, like you got good friends and connections, you feel, good sexually about yourself, you feel good, morally about yourself, all these things will raise your perception of yourself, release more serotonin, and have you feel better, right? So that's what antidepressants tend to operate on, is our serotonin, to try and make us feel better. Now, the issue that we run into, and this is what a craving essentially is it's a trade-off between dopamine and serotonin, where you're engaging in an activity that gives you a hit of dopamine, gives you this thing of excitement, but over time, as you continuously engage in that activity, it lowers your status and therefore lowers your sense of well-being, lowers the amount of serotonin that you're releasing. So a good example of this would be someone who plays too many video games. The thought of playing the video game, it creates this dopaminergic excitement, but as they keep playing it and maybe devoting way too much time to it, their life starts to decline, and the way that they feel about themselves actually starts to decline. And so they're trading that spike for an overall net loss in serotonin, which actually just makes your life worse and makes you want to reach for your addiction even more, and you can substitute video games for any other addiction, like that's a typical pattern of a drug addict. They have their addiction, gives them this big spike of excitement, and then as they keep leaning into it, the rest of their life degrades. The way they feel about the way they feel about themselves goes down, and then they feel like they need to get more and more and more of that hit, right? And so how do we get out of this? What do we want to do? Well, what we want to shift into is having our dopamine aligned with our serotonin, where you actually want the things that raise your status. So for example, at this point, I love creating content. The thought of sitting down and working on a new video, it excites me. It releases dopamine. But even better is that as I release new content and I do my work, my status, financial, how I stand in the community, my status as a creator, it goes up, and my perception of myself, it continues to improve. And so I feel better. And that's what we want, is we want our dopamine to serve us. But how do we get there when we're stuck in cravings? How do you get yourself to love that nutritious, healthy food when you're super hooked on junk food, right? Or substitute whatever sort of discipline challenge you're running into. How do we create this shift? Well, essentially, you have to recondition the way your brain works. And in order to do this, there's going to be a moment of sacrifice. And so you're going to have these critical moments of decision making where it's like, do you eat the cookie or do you eat the veggie, right? And when you have that point there, in order for you to take that act of discipline, you're going to have to experience some negative emotions. You're essentially going to be sacrificing that dopamine for the future spike of serotonin. But in that moment, it's just uncomfortable. Your brain might even release cortisol and other negative neurochemicals that make you feel crappy. It makes you feel this sense of lack and longing. And so we need to find a way to get past that, because that's where most people get stuck. It's like the craving gets intense enough, that feeling of missing out feels strong enough, and then you give in, and then you don't change, and then you stay where you're at. And if you don't like where you're at, well, then that's a problem, right? So what we got to do is, in that moment where you feel like you're missing out, we got to figure out how to create a neurochemical boost, how to give yourself a shot of feel-good neurochemicals that act as a stopgap, that kind of keep you supported in the moments of struggle, so that you can end up ultimately reconditioning your brain, engaged in that discipline, and then rewire your dopaminergic system. Okay. And that's what the cut method is. The cut method is a way of kind of flipping switches inside of your body so that you can make yourself feel better in that moment of sacrifice. And it makes the sacrifice far more bearable. And in fact, it can actually become a tremendously personally transformative thing, as you will see. And so in that, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to figure out, okay, if we're going to be giving up dopamine and the serotonin's not coming till later, what can we get in the present moment? Well, we're going to be trying to get oxytocin. We're going to be maybe getting a little vasopressin, maybe some endorphin, maybe even a little bit of an adrenaline. But we can learn how to tap into these things that gives us the spike that pushes us through. And so time to get into the technique and show you how this actually works. All right, so the very first step of the cut method is to notice that you are being triggered and become aware, okay? If you're just on autopilot and you're just zooming by, acting off feeling, well, then you're not even going to be able to pause long enough to use the cut method. And a lot of people in their habits, they are on autopilot. So if you struggle with this, that's beyond the scope of this video, and I highly recommend you check out my Metascript method. It's a completely free guide I've used to help guys really recondition their habits. It's just a journaling technique. It's really simple, but super, super powerful. And so you can get a link to that in the free guides link in the description below. So first step is you want to become aware, and if you need to, use the Metascript method to make sure you increase your awareness. Once you're aware that you're getting triggered, like, oh, I want that cookie and I'm not supposed to be eating that cookie, you want to then physically relax, okay? Physical relaxation does a lot of things, but just to summarize it, it is a way for your rational mind to calm down your emotional mind, okay? By physically relaxing yourself, taking deep breath, calms you down, kicks you, further out of autopilot and gives you more control. It also reduces the intensity of whatever emotions that you're dealing with. So first step, deep breath, physically relax after you notice that you're getting triggered. Okay, so after you notice that you're being triggered and you physically relax, the next step is you must simply tell yourself no. All right. And if you can say no to yourself and your emotional mind's like, okay, fine, we're not going to do that thing, and it's just ready to move on, then fantastic. You've already overcome the urge. But if you've got any sort of deep reconditioning to do, or you're really hooked into the thing you're trying to quit, then when you say no, there's going to be a part of you that gets upset. And this is actually exactly what we're looking for. You're going to feel a sinking feeling in your chest. And I call this triggering the black hole. And this is what we're looking for. We need the black hole if we're going to create that neurochemical event we're talking about. And so you have to say no to yourself with enough seriousness so that your emotional mind knows that, okay, we're not going to get our hit of pleasure right now. And very often this creates this sense of, oh, but I want it. Oh, I'm missing out. Oh, I don't feel okay now. That's what we want. That's what we're looking for. So you want to say no with enough intensity to trigger your black hole. So after you trigger it, you want to actually bring your attention all the way in to the black hole. All right. You want to bring your attention into the center of your chest because that's where the black hole resides. I don't know why. I mean, just because of the way our emotional neurons are configured, it's seems to be right in here is right where you're going to feel this thing. And so you dive right in, you bring your attention right into the center of your chest, and you want to welcome that feeling in. You want to allow that desire, that anguish, that sensation of lack and longing. You want to turn that volume up on it. You want to feel it as fully as you can. You can think of it as you're treating your emotional self as a friend, and you're willing to hear everything they have to say. And this might be kind of intense. It might be kind of overwhelming, but this is what you need to do if you really want to process this thing. Don't hurt yourself and don't drive yourself crazy, but if you're mentally unstable, maybe do this with your therapist. But for everyone else, you can probably just dive into this and feel this lack and longing. Now, here's where we start the transmutation. Okay, we're going to take all of that pain and we're going to use it as context for an act of love. All right. Now that sounds really fluffy, blah, blah, blah. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to trigger an oxytocin response. Oxytocin is the connection neurochemical. It's the one that's designed for affection, for love, for feelings of unity. It's what lets you feel care for other people. Right. And we're going to actually trigger that within our own selves. And, the pain of the emotion mixed with that, it also, I think, can release some endorphin, which is kind of like a feel-good, anesthetic in a lot of ways. And so what we're trying to do is you want to think about finding that part inside of you that's all twisted up in this craving, that's all twisted up in the deceptions of the craving and all that kind of stuff. And we're trying to free it. We're trying to care about it. So it's you dive into that black hole and you start radiating love to yourself like a bright light. All right. And you can think of it as giving yourself an internal hug or an internal smile. And something that really helps with this is self-talk. So you tell yourself, hey man, I know you're hurting. I know you're struggling right now. I know we want that thing, but guess what? We're not going to do that right now because I care about you more than that. I want to get you something truly good. And in order for us to get you something truly good, we're going to have to not act out on that thing. And instead, we're going to go do something better. Okay. We're moving towards something good. We're moving toward this goal or that goal or whatever. It's knowing yourself and knowing what you're aiming for is important here because you can talk to yourself and lead yourself and inspire yourself to take the better path. And, I talk a lot about self-talk in my other stuff. I have a full series on it as well. And so if you need more help with the self-talk, check out my other things. But basically, you want to show up as a leader and a friend, but most importantly, show up as a loving presence, a loving, supportive presence to that part, and a commitment to make, to serve that part better. All right, and it's something that happens in your heart. Right? This is why we have to bring our attention to our heart because that's, people always talk about the power of the heart. Well, it's a real thing that you actually have control over and you can tap into. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Now, the final piece, after we do that, you should feel connected. You should have developed a common ground between your rational and emotional mind by meeting at the full experience of what your emotionality is dealing with. And then once you do this, you center yourself in this way, you bring your attention to this pain lovingly. Well, then from there, you can lead yourself to something better. And so that's what you have to do. You have to do something else. You don't want to just sit there and stare at the black hole and try and obliterate it perfectly. You just want to be there present with it enough so that you can do something else. Maybe it's something simple as go for a walk. Maybe it's, you go get to work on a project. Maybe it's you eat the vegetable instead of the cookie. It's all going to be context dependent, and choosing what that thing is, there's a bit of nuance to that. It's about knowing yourself, understanding if there's any underlying stuff going on. Maybe you're just craving a cookie because you're tired or because you're stressed, and maybe you need to address the tiredness or the stress in some ways, right? So it's all going to be contextual about what you do, but you got to do something else. And once you do that, once you take action moving in that opposite direction, boom, you've done it. You've completed the circuit. You've completed a repetition of a reconditioning event. And that's all you have to do. And you just got to do that when the cravings come up. And it gets easier and easier as you develop familiarity with this process. And in a lot of ways, it becomes a way of life. You realize that so much stuff is blocked because of a disconnect internally, because you're not actually being present with what's actually happening. But once you start this and you start showing up as a true leader and friend to yourself on a very deep level, experientially, well, then everything starts to change. So my friends, I hope you found this useful and helpful. If you did, please help me out by feeding the algorithm, by liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and by commenting. You can just leave a random comment, or you can let me know how this technique has worked for you. Let me know any trouble you're having with it. If you're someone who's been following me for a while and been using this for a while, please share your experiences, inspire other people with the results you've gotten and how it's helped you. So thank you guys so much for coming out. Keep winning. I'll see you in the next one. Ooh, yep.